You were born here, or your parents were, and you still never knew. Not the beaches. The other Jamaica. The island keeps a second map its own people are kept off of. Land signed away to foreign navies, caves locked behind gates, a whole island the government closed and will not let you land on. Some of it was hidden by neglect, some of it was hidden on purpose. These are 11 places no one was meant to find. Number 11. Roaring River sits in the parish of Westmoreland, near Petersfield, on land that once belonged to Colonel Peter Beckford, a man who came to the island around 1660 and later broke his neck in a riot in the House of Assembly. His estate was one of the largest sugar plantations in the colony, watered by a river that runs underground for miles, hidden in the rock. Before it surfaces at a place they call the Head, to the men who ran the estate, the river was an engine. It turned the mill, it fed the cane, it made the fortune. But the people he enslaved learned the other use of it. At night, when the great house slept, the injured slipped away into the caverns and the mineral springs, lowering torn bodies into water they believed could heal what the estate had done to them. There is a blue hole feeding it, sitting on private land, where the upwelling meets a second source from an old aqueduct beside a cottonwood tree 300 years old, and pools believed to run more than 120 feet deep. The cave itself is only about 70 feet down, yet the same river still supplies water to most of the parish today. From Georges Plain to the capital at Savannah-la-Mar, it runs from taps and kitchens across Westmoreland, and almost no one who drinks it knows what happened in the dark where it comes from. That was a river hiding a plantation secret. The next place was built to keep the people out, not the water in. Number 10. Stewart Castle stands in the parish of Trelawney, near Duncan's, down a rough track most drivers pass without turning. A Scottish sugar planter named James Stewart raised it in the 1770s. 3 stories of cut stone with square towers at opposite corners and musket loopholes cut into the walls all the way around. That is the detail that tells the story. A planter does not fortify a house against nothing. He built it against the Maroons in the hills and against the more than 300 people he enslaved on the estate below it. Every loophole was aimed outward, at the very people whose labor paid for the stone. Inside, he cut a water cistern large enough to outlast a siege, so that if the estate rose against him, he could shut the courtyard and hold until help came. His son commanded the militia and served as custos of the parish. The estate grew past 1,200 acres and 300 cattle. The Kaiser Bauxite Company bought the land in 1930 and handed the ruins to the National Heritage Trust in 1960. Today, the towers still stand, the gun holes still stare out at the fields, and the national monument that is supposed to protect it has been left to rot in the bush. Choked with litter, unsignposted, forgotten by the country that owns it. That castle was abandoned to neglect. The next place was abandoned on the top of a mountain, and you cannot even find it without a guide. Number 9. Cinchona sits in the parish of St. Andrew, high in the Blue Mountains, between 4,500 and 5,500 feet above the sea, the highest botanical garden in the Western Hemisphere. The governor, Sir John Peter Grant, established it in 1868 on a mountain track to grow cinchona trees, whose bark makes quinine, the one drug that kept the empire alive against malaria. It was a race against the Dutch to control the supply, and for a moment, Jamaica was in it. The venture failed within a decade when prices collapsed and the plantation could not pay for itself. The New York Botanical Garden took it over as a research station. Then the Smithsonian. Kew's own gardeners stocked the slopes with eucalyptus, rubber, cork oak, and orchids gathered from nearly every continent, until the garden held plants that had no business growing within sight of each other. Now the buildings are dilapidated, the paint long gone, and the trees have lost their labels. The road up is a series of unmarked junctions where you have to ask at every turn or you simply will not arrive. Fog rolls through the ruins most afternoons, and the silence up there is total, broken only by wind moving through trees that no longer have anyone to name them. A garden that once supplied medicine to an empire, hidden in plain sight above the capital. And most Jamaicans could not point to it on a map. That was a place too high to reach. The next one hid whole armies of runners underground. Number 8. Green Grotto Caves lie in the parish of St. Anne, between Runaway Bay and Discovery Bay, a limestone labyrinth that runs for miles beneath the coast road. Every group that ever needed to disappear in Jamaica used it. The Taino held ceremonies in its chambers long before the first European arrived. The Spanish hid in it in 1655 as the British took the island, some of them slipping through the tunnels all the way to the sea and escaping to Cuba. Runaway slaves sheltered in the same dark. Then, between the world wars, smugglers used the passages to run arms across to Cuba, and during the Second World War, the government stored barrels of rum in the entrance, out of sight and out of reach. They once called it the Runaway Bay Caves. And in 1973, the makers of a James Bond film shot a submarine scene inside it. There is an underground lake 36 meters down, glass still and green in the floodlights, so clear it looks almost solid. Century after century, the same darkness kept hiding whoever needed it most, and it never once gave a single one of them away. The tour guides walk you past the pretty formations and point out the shapes in the rock. What they are really walking you through is 400 years of people using this cave for exactly one reason: because no one was supposed to find them in it. That cave hid people who chose to vanish. The next one swallows people who never meant to. Number 7. Smoky Hole. Cave opens in the parish of Manchester, near Cross Keys, and it is the deepest known cave on the island, dropping close to 200 meters straight into the limestone. Almost no one goes down it. It is not a tour. It is not signposted for families. There is no railing and no ticket booth. The descent is the kind that serious caving organizations approach with ropes, helmets, and a great deal of respect, because a mistake here does not end in a scraped knee. The drop is close to 640 feet, a shaft of black air with the surface shrinking to a coin of light above you. Inside is a vast roost of bats and the Jamaican cave cricket, a species that lives out its entire life in these underground rooms, in a darkness that has never once known daylight. Manchester is more than 90% limestone, riddled with sinkholes and underground rivers, and Smoky Hole is the throat of it, the deepest point on a plateau where the ground can simply open beneath your feet. People live and farm on the surface directly above it every single day. They plant, they build, they raise families. The plateau looks solid underfoot right up until the moment it isn't, and by then it is far too late to matter. Only a handful have ever seen the bottom of what lies under them. That was the deepest cave. The next is the longest, and it floods. Number 6. Gourry Cave runs through the parish of Manchester too. Near Christiana, 3.5 kilometers of mapped passage that make it the longest cave in Jamaica, dropping 90 meters through 3 separate entrances along an icy underground river. And it floods without much warning. In the early 1800s, the land above belonged to a slaveholder named George Young, and the cave beneath became a hideout for enslaved Africans running for their freedom, a place where the cold and the dark and the rising water were all real dangers. But the alternative was worse. Down there in the black, freedom was worth the risk of drowning. Most of the system has been walked and charted, but the full record of what lies at the far end has never truly been closed. It sits inside a 265-acre forest reserve at 2,000 feet, reopened to visitors, where the river stays about 4 feet deep through the dry season, and then rises fast when the rain comes, without warning, filling passages that were dry an hour before. Even the people who go in with lights and ropes turn back before the water gets too deep. The forest above gives no hint of the cold river threading the rock beneath it. And the people picnicking in the reserve rarely learn who once hid in the dark under their feet. A river that once hid the enslaved, still hiding the end of its own passage from everyone who tries to follow it. That was where people hid. The next is where the last of a species is hidden from you on purpose. Number 5. Alligator Hole lies in Canoe Valley on the border of Clarendon and Manchester, a mangrove river not 2 kilometers long that empties quietly into Long Bay. It holds the last West Indian manatees in Jamaican water, a small family of them, moving slow through pools so clear the sandy bottom shows every ripple. These are among the last of their kind on the island, and everyone who works here knows it. In the early 1980s, the government turned this stretch into a protected reserve and brought in a small group of manatees to study a species that was quietly disappearing. You go out only with a warden in a guided boat, and the animals are wild and shy, so a sighting is never promised. They surface near a feeding spot by the dam, usually late in the day, and you watch from the water's edge, no closer than they will tolerate. American crocodiles share the same channels, gliding through the reeds, and nearby the limestone hides deep freshwater sinkholes that drop many feet straight down into still green water. Blink on the coast road, and you would drive straight past the turn, never knowing what the mangroves are quietly keeping alive just out of sight. This is one of the very few places in Jamaica where the state fences off a river and guards a single family of animals to keep a whole species alive. And most of the island has never once heard its name. That was hidden to protect an animal. The next was hidden by an earthquake and then locked shut. Number 4. Two Sisters Cave sits in the parish of St. Catherine, in the dry scrub of the Hellshire Hills above Portmore, and it is roughly 200,000 years old. For most of that time, it was a single cavern. Then came the great earthquake of 1692, the one that dropped Port Royal into the sea and drowned it in minutes. The same shock brought this roof down and split the cave into 2 open mouths, divided now by a mountain of fallen rubble. Below the surface are freshwater sinkholes the Taino once drank from. And on the wall of the northern pool, a human face carved into the rock about 700 years ago, still looking out. No one ever lived here. It was ceremonial ground, sacred, set apart, and a carved Taino ceremonial stool was recovered from it and now sits in the National Gallery. For years, the caves were open to locals and to tourists who came to swim in the pools. Then, quietly, it was closed, owned by a state company, gated and left. Stand at the northern pool now, and you are looking at ground people worshipped on long before Columbus ever laid eyes on the island, sealed away where almost no one will ever see it. One of the oldest sacred places on the whole island, shut behind a padlock that most people walking the coast nearby never even knew was there. That was sealed by the state. The next 2 were signed away to a foreign country entirely. Number 3. Vernham Field spreads across the parish of Clarendon in the flat cane country of Veer, and it is a ghost the Americans left behind. In March 1941, Britain leased land right across Jamaica to the United States under the deal that traded bases for warships, and construction of an Army air base here began. That May, thousands of Jamaicans poured in for the work, digging and pouring concrete through the heat for months on end. For a few years, this was a fully working American military airfield in the middle of the Jamaican countryside, with its own runways, its own hangars, even its own postal facilities. And stamp collectors still trade the postmarks stamped Portland Bight and Sandy Gully, Clarendon. Then the war ended. The Americans folded up and left, and the runways simply stayed, cracking slowly in the sun. People race cars along the old strips now, engines screaming down concrete poured for warplanes, and there is always talk of turning it into something bigger. For a few short years, the closest thing to America in the whole of the Caribbean sat in the middle of a Clarendon cane field, and then it was gone. What almost none of them stopped to think about is what this ground actually was. Foreign soil in everything but name, a piece of Jamaica handed over to another country's army, used, and then walked away from. That airbase was left behind. The next place the foreign lease never fully let go of. Number 2. Navy Island sits just off Port Antonio in the parish of Portland. 64 acres of green floating in the harbor. close enough to the town that you could almost swim to it. Captain William Bligh, of Bounty fame, careened his ships in its shallows. The Royal Navy later turned it into a gun battery to guard the harbor mouth, which is exactly where the name comes from. Then, in the 1940s, the Hollywood actor Errol Flynn bought the whole island as a private retreat and threw the parties that made it famous up and down the coast, planting a row of royal palms that still stand tall today. After Flynn, it became a resort, drew its guests for a while, and then slowly fell into decay and silence. For a brief moment, it was the most glamorous address in the Caribbean. Then the parties stopped, the guests left, and the island slid quietly back into the green. Today, it is a closed island, owned outright by the government of Jamaica, and you cannot legally set foot on it. Fishermen will circle it slowly for you if you ask, for a price, and they will lower their voices and tell you that on some nights they still see lights moving through the trees and still hear music drifting across the water. An island you can see clearly from the shore and are not allowed to land on. That island was closed by Jamaica. The last one was closed by treaty to a foreign navy, and the lease runs longer than you think. Number 1. Little Goat Island sits in the Portland Bight, in the parish of St. Catherine, about a mile and a half off Old Harbor Bay. In September 1940, the United States took a 99-year lease on it and built a seaplane base, dredging nearly 3 million cubic yards of seabed and burying 75,000 gallons of fuel in 11 steel tanks sunk into the ground. The base was abandoned after the war, but the Americans kept the lease. And on paper, that lease still runs all the way to 2039. Jamaica inherited the arrangement at independence and could not simply take its own island back. Then, in 2013, the government proposed handing these same protected islands to China for a giant shipping port, until public outcry finally killed the plan in 2016. The Jamaican iguana, one of the rarest lizards on Earth, once roamed here, until the mongoose wiped it off the islands entirely. Today, Little Goat is a closed wildlife sanctuary inside a protected area declared in 1999. The ground still scarred with 1940s tarmac. It is one thing to lose an island to the sea. It is another thing entirely to lose it to a signature on a page in Washington and still be counting down the years. An island signed away to one foreign power, nearly given to a second, and off limits to the very people who own it. No one was ever meant to set foot here at all. 11 places, kept from the people who own them. There are more. Subscribe and we will keep finding them.